We'll see how that turns out. Okay, so just for the sake of the recording, if the recording works, this is Sunday, May 24th, and it's the Celtic Christianity course, and we're rebooting it after one session. And we talked a little bit last time about history, and so when I started studying for this, when I started reading, I read a lot of books and internet resources and so forth. One of the questions that came to my mind was, who were the Celtic people because I want the perspective of when Christianity came to these lands, to the Celtic people. What was their perspective? What was their outlook? What were the people like who received the message of Christ? And so how did they interpret that? How did they respond to that from the perspective of what these people were like? So that's what got me going, like looking at, who are the Celts? And by the way, Celtic and Celtic are both correct pronunciations, so you can say it either way. The word Celt or Celtic comes from an ancient Greek word meaning hidden. And there are various theories on why they were called hidden, why the Greeks called them hidden. Nobody really knows, but that's where the word comes from. So the Celts were around, we're going back to like 1200 BC. And there was the original Hallstatt region was named after a city where archaeology discovered some of the old Celtic things. That dates to 800 BC. And then you see the lighter green color going all the way out to the UK and parts of Spain. They expanded there 600 to 450 BC. And their maximum expansion, you see the very light green, even in the Middle East, the Galatians were Celtic. So the thing is, they were fierce warriors. How many people have seen Braveheart?
Yeah,
I love that movie. I haven't seen it in years.
Sure.
When they're all fighting and they're mooning people with their Celts and they're running out naked and fighting, and they had a reputation of being fierce warriors and kind of crazy, fighting naked and so forth. And they sacked a couple of Roman cities, so Caesar got really ticked off at them, and went after them. They became a target for the Roman Empire, which is what happened to them. It's why they got driven out of mainland Europe and into the north and the west, because it took a couple of generations to do it, but Rome managed to drive them out. So part of the Roman expansion was getting rid of the Celts or the Celts, which is why they're.
Hey, David,
Yes.
What does it mean when you say, if a person said, I'm a Celt, what would that mean? They have no country of their own, it looks like. You don't walk across a boundary line of your Celt city.
Right.
What was a, how would you define that?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are like hundreds of culturally distinct people who do not have a country. They're nationless cultures. Like my wife is Armenian. For over 1,000 years, there were Armenian people without an Armenian country. So what defines it is a people with a common culture. Music, dance, clothing, perspectives on life, how they look at things, genetic heritage. It's a shared number of shared things that make a culture, and not all cultures have a country. Probably the Celt, I don't think the Celts ever had, like you said, they never had a Celtic country. They certainly dominated Europe, 1,000 years BC, and after that dominated parts of the UK. But you're right, there was never a country, but there's a culture and an attitude, a perspective. There's a tendency to most of them play the bagpipes, for example, even the regions in Spain and France where there are Celtic people.
It makes sense.
Yeah, sure. So these people were Iron Age people. There was a salt trade going on. So they had a culture of their own. And so what happened is, let's see, I'm trying to advance this and it's not working. There we go. Oh, here's an archaeological deed, a helmet of an Iron Age Celtic chieftain. I just thought that was a cool picture.
Looked like an overhead fan.
What's that?
Looks like an overhead fan.
Yeah. Another thing we talked, so when we talked, the one session we had, the questions came up about, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but it came up about when did Christianity come to the British Isles? And, offhand, I knew that in 325, the Council of Nicaea, there were 2 British bishops that were invited to Nicaea. They couldn't make it because they couldn't afford it. Actually, they were offered money from Rome, but they didn't want to be beholden to Rome. So they declined the money from Rome, as they didn't want to feel obligated to vote in favor of whatever Rome had to say. And that's because the nature of the Celtic people, even back then, 325, they were fiercely independent. They didn't want to be beholden to Rome. They didn't want to be under Rome's rulership. The British Isles Christianity, for the vast majority of time, has been very independent and had their own way of thinking. And but I after that question arose in that last session that we had 2 months ago or so, I started looking into it to find the earliest. Now I tried finding earliest evidence of Christianity in the British Isles. There is a legend and a tradition that some people believe that Joseph of Arimathea, which is the same Joseph who gave his tomb to Jesus, established a church in Glastonbury. It's a legend. We don't have any proof of that, if that happened or not. But there is proof of this fella, Aristobulus. He was named the Bishop of Britain, and he died in the year 99. So we know that Christianity made it to the British Isles right from the very beginning. In fact, Aristobulus was mentioned by Paul in one of his letters in the Bible. So Christianity made it to England, the British Isles, the UK, right from the beginning, and I find that fascinating.
What I find fascinating, Dave, is that Christianity migrated all that way to Britain at a time when travel wasn't easy.
Right, I know.
And that's what's amazing to me, that it branched out and grew and grew and grew and went off so far.
Oh, me too, Rob. I almost find that incredulous. I've like looked at multiple resources to make sure this was true, because like that seems surprising to me, because they had to go on foot.
Well, Joseph of Arimathea, what would prompt him? I mean, if the legend is true, what would prompt him to end up in Britain to form a church, or
right.
At least be aware of it? I mean,
well, the Great Commission. What's that, Peter?
One of the great sources of tin, and so there was a vast tin trade between Cornwall and the Mediterranean countries who needed.
Oh, okay. Well, that might explain it then.
Traveling by sea was a lot quicker in a way, and a lot
I
safer.
I heard he wanted to try out the China.
You're breaking up, bud.
Going back to Aristobulus, or however you pronounce his name, he was named Bishop of Britain. Who named him Bishop of Britain?
Don't know. St. Paul, I assume, but I don't know.
Yeah, what was this here? Certainly nobody in Rome.
I believe I read somewhere that it was Paul. St. Paul named him bishop.
So because of like you said, the difficulty of traveling, bishops were not named in the same way they're named now. It was we use a democratic process now, but it was kind of a like elder chosen position. So the leaders and the elders of a given Christian community would identify one from within their group and kind of present that person, and whoever their father apostle, so Paul, Peter, whoever was the one that had converted them, would be consulted on whether or not this person should be ordained, and then they would be ordained to the office of bishop, which was both a Christian leadership role and a sort of governmental role, similar to now.
I just looked him up. He's a Christian saint named by Hippolytus of Rome and Dorotheus of Gaza, as one of the 70 disciples mentioned in Luke 10, verses 1 to 24, and as the first bishop in Roman Britain.
Yeah, right. He was one of the 70, and he was brother to, gosh, it was in my notes, brother to somebody. Oh, Barnabas, Holy Apostle Barnabas of the 70.
Oh,
So he was brother, so he and his brother were both in the 70. And Robbie, you were asking, like, and that fascinates me too, about why do they go all the way to England? And like Peter said, there was a trade route. You know, it was also the Great Commission. They were all told to go out and spread the gospel to all the corners of the earth. And they certainly knew about the British Isles. You know, even though it was a long way to go, it wasn't a mystery to Rome that the British Isles existed. And they had trade with them, so I think they would be a target. They would be somebody who would say, hey, we do trade with these people. Let's bring Christianity to them, you know. So it's not implausible that they would want to do it. It is amazing that they would go so far on foot in that day and age. But the same kind of legends exist about apostles from Jesus's time going to India. I think it was
Right.
Thomas. Thomas went to India. That's a commonly accepted tradition of the church. You know, that's even further than the UK.
Well, the other thing I find so amazing is that Christianity took hold and went to these places. I mean, you have an apostle going to some far place. There's no guarantee that it's going to catch, but it did, and here we
Right.
are today. I mean, that's what's truly amazing to me.
Yes, I agree. All right, so when we talk about the Celts, what happened to the Celts, and where are they today? So these are modern day Celtic regions. And if you're like me, you probably grew up, let's start from Peter, who grew up in England, but here in America, I think when you hear Celtic, I think Irish and Scotland. I don't know that anything else is Celtic until I started studying for this course and discovered there are, you know, yes, mostly it's the North and West, Scotland, Ireland, Wales is Celtic, Cornwall is a Celtic region, but I didn't know that this peninsula off of France, Brittany, is Celtic. And there's 2 regions in Spain that are Celtic. And if you go to these regions, there are people who consider themselves Celtic and play the bagpipes and wear kilts and, you know, traditional in terms of celebrating their heritage and tradition, maybe not on an everyday basis, but they identify themselves culturally.
I think I might be part Celtic because my ancestry goes back to Scotland.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think we all, and that's the other thing in our first session, we talked about who had Celtic roots. And I think virtually everybody raised their hand and had some sort of identification in heritage-wise of being Celtic and or having been to these regions of the world. So, and I
So
don't.
maybe that explains my profanity for wearing plaid skirts.
probably didn't the kilt without underwear.
You look real good.
Oh yeah, so
Oh, God.
pictures too. This is so these are some old Celtic churches. This is in the Scottish Highlands, looking over Loch Shiel. And this is the. Oops, I'm sorry, didn't advance on the. There we go. That's the one.
The Celtic Christian.
And then this one, the one that I used for the heading, that is a 12th century church in Wales. And then we were talking about the modern Celtic languages. So we have, let's see, this is, so Breton, there's 532,000 active speakers. In Cornish, so that's the this little area here off of Cornwall. And you see that's kind of speckled on the map. So there's only 500 first language speakers left in speaking Cornish. 575,000. And this is from a couple years ago. It's fairly recent statistics. I don't remember the year. This is within the last decade these statistics were taken. So 575,000 speaking Welsh, 62,000 speaking Scottish, Irish Gaelic, 355. Manx I find interesting. So the Isle of Man is this island right here. They have their own distinct Celtic culture, and they had their own language that became extinct in 1974. There is some movement on board to bring it back. They're teaching it in the schools again, but there are really no native speakers who use it as their first language. find that interesting too, for a language to become extinct that recently. In our lifetimes, this language became extinct. And Irish is the only one that I believe, maybe Welsh too, are actually official second languages of those places. But most of these are not official second languages. So in terms of Celtic Christianity, there was a golden age from 450 to 650. There were many saints and stories that came out of them that age. And those are some of the stories and saints I'm going to talk about over this course. Some really interesting stories that come out. Like I said before, one of the natural propensities of the Celts is to shun central authority, which is why they fought against Roman rule over their church for so long. They didn't give in to Roman rule for a long time, over a millennium, and they didn't stay under Roman rule for very long, just a few centuries, really, up through the 12th century, actually, when they finally capitulated to Rome. And of course, King Henry got them out of that again a few centuries later. So, characteristics of Celtic spirituality, and I actually read several books on this to collect this list of ideas that I see as common themes. One of the themes you see in Celtic spirituality is this idea of thin places. And thin places are kind of like holy places, special places in the world that you are closer to the spiritual world, that the veil between our natural world that we live in and the spiritual world is thinner. They talk about a thin veil. So you may be more likely to see angels or experience spiritual things, easier to hear God speaking to you. It's almost as if the material world and time itself are fluid. And I think I think there are some things in the Celtic branch of Christianity that they picked up from, like this is very Druidic. I think the people that, when Christianity came to them, they were pagans and Druids, and some of those philosophies and outlooks on life kind of bled over into Christianity when they adopted Christianity. And this strikes me as one of those things. Another characteristic that they talk about is Anamchara. Anamchara is a soul friend. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. It's a very special friend that you share. It's not quite a priest to you, but almost in that sense, where you can share anything with them, and it's going to be protected information, and they guide you and counsel you in your spiritual walk.
Oh, these are real people?
Sort of like a wife.
Yes.
Oh,
You have
okay.
a special friend who's your, like, a spiritual partner in life, so to speak.
Okay, like a soulmate, but not so much a mate
Kind of.
per se. Yeah.
Right. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that too in a second. Some interesting quotes on that. Celtic spirituality is notable for supreme confidence that this cosmos is in God, and that if we're not in God, it simply could not exist. Another thing I saw, a common theme in reading about this, is equality of women, especially during that golden age and before that. You would find that women were not treated any differently. There are instances of women being deacons. Before Christianity, they were Druids, they were landowners, rulers. And this comes from multiple sources too. So historian Tacitus mentioned, and so he was a Roman historian in 56 to 118. He said they do not distinguish among the rulers by sex. So a woman could be queen not because she was married to the king, but because she was the ruler of her little kingdom. And another Latin historian, Ammianus Marcellinus, in the 4th century, quoted an earlier author. I don't know when that was earlier, but I love this quote. A whole troop of foreigners would not be able to withstand a single Gaul if he called his wife to assistance, who is usually very strong and with blue eyes, especially when swelling her neck, gnashing her teeth, and branding her sallow arms of enormous size. She begins to strike blows mingled with kicks as if they were so many missiles, sent from a string of a catapult.
Wow.
Wow.
So don't mess with the Celtic women. They were badass, man. You know,
Dear, I'm in trouble. This is 3/4 Scottish.
You're doing
I think the Roman people were fascinated with the Celts, probably because of legendary things like this. Oh, my Roomba's going off. Let me go stop that.
Roomba.
what's going on.
He's burning,
His
I
book-
think.
Roomba, the robotic vacuum cleaner.
Yeah, that was good. That was going to be a lot of noise. The Romans were also fascinated with the Celts because of the way, because of the look. Because, you know, the Romans were dark-haired and dark-skinned. They're Mediterranean. And the Celtic people were blonde and red-haired and very fair-skinned. And like they even mentioned here, the blue eyes. And if you look at the ancient paintings of angels, they were often fair-skinned and light-haired. And I think there was some depiction, Celtic-like application of their way they look to their paintings of angels. And there was a lot of fascination with, I also have seen that as a theme coming up over and over again, as the Roman fascination with the Celts. So the Anamchara, the soul friend, I think we'll talk about this, and it's 10 o'clock already, so we'll talk about this and then let you guys go enjoy liturgy. So Saint Bridget, who is a very prominent Celtic saint, I don't remember when she was around, like 4th or 5th century, so quite a while ago. She has said, anyone without a soul friend is like a body without a head, which is a very graphic metaphor to make in her day and time, because the Celtic warriors, when they conquered people, would often decapitate their victims and carry their heads around on their horses when they were running in the battlefield. So it's kind of a graphic metaphor for her day and age.
Yeah, it's very graphic.
Yeah. So this is from a book I read called Soul Friend. The writer is Edward Sellner. He said that to be a soul friend is to provide a cell, a place of sanctuary to another, where through our acceptance, love, and hospitality, he or she can grow in wisdom and both of us in depth. So it's almost like it's somewhere between a normal friend and a priest, somewhere in the middle of that, but it's also a mutual thing. When distilled down to its essence, a soul friend desires to see the other become the person that God intended when he created them. In practice, soul friendship is more than a general friendship. It seeks to draw the other into a greater awareness of God's activity in their life, helping to attune their heart to the Father's voice that calls to each one of us.
David, is it a two-way relationship? Always?
Pardon me?
Is it a two-way relationship?
Yes, it is.
Always.
Yes, that's what it's supposed to be.
That's the distinction between a soul friend and a confessor, Peter.
Okay.
Okay, so it's 10 o'clock, and I think this is going to go for a few weeks yet. There's more to talk about. Like I said, I'm going to talk a little more about Celtic spirituality. I have some stories about some saints from the Golden Age and some prayers and poems from the era. And so I think we're going to enjoy this. But it's 10 o'clock, so let's call it to a close. Anybody else have anything to add before we?
Yeah, David, you might.
Just one comment on your. Go on, Peter.
Just, what you're describing, really modern day services that we have, that we use, the New Zealand Book of Common Prayer, seems to carry a lot of that over, and I'd be intrigued as to how that came about.
In terms of the soul friend, you mean?
No, in the general approach to
Wait.
in the New
What?
Zealand Book of
Go on.
Common Prayer is very much nature oriented and living close to nature and so on. And
Yeah,
I'm
the
just,
spiritualities are very similar.
I'm wondering how it came about. I know a lot of Scotsmen went to New Zealand, but it really is a very active area of it. I think it's probably the most
Interesting.
of the religious groups that are in the church.
Interesting, Peter. I didn't know that. That's really cool.
Going back to you talked about thin places, David. But one of my favorite stories, we were on one of Judy's trips to the Holy Land, and part of the experience was to go out on the Sea of Galilee. And it was very rough, and they almost canceled it, but it was the only chance we would have to go out. So they did take us out, and it was rocking and rolling so much that when Judy went to sit down, her plastic chair had moved, and she just went down flat on her fanny and back. It was bad. But anyway, they had a minister with every group who was telling the story about Jesus calming the waters. The very minute he finished his presentation, the sea went flat.
Wow.
So, a thin moment, just one in my mind where you feel close to God. And it was just amazing. So,
Right.
anyway.
Yep. Good example. All right. Well.
Thank you, David. Good.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming. I look forward to continuing this next week.
Yep, same time?
Yep. Yeah, I'll be on at 9 for chatting. And
Okay, same meeting number?
yeah, well, probably. I'm going to talk to Mother Allison about that, see if it's better to use the church one or not. But
Okay.
if we change it, I'll send out a new email.
Okay. Everybody take care.
Thank
Nice to be with you.
We're going to church now to listen to
Have a
Beth.
good day.
Same
Yes,
here.
I'm not offering to pray you out because you're going to go straight into church, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.